Back in 1975, a single government decree set out to completely transform the Philippines, a nation of, over 7,000 islands? It was this massive plan to overhaul how the country connected with itself and, with the rest of the world, by taking control of its most vital gateways. So today, we're diving into the story of how the Philippine Ports Authority was born.
I mean, just think about that for a second. It's a truly monumental challenge, right? Before the mid-70s, the Philippines was grappling with this exact question. You had all these ports, each with their own ways of doing things, their own potential, but there was no single vision, no master plan. So, how'd they even begin to try and solve it?
All right, so before we can get to the solution, we really need to understand the problem. This decree didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a direct answer to some really serious challenges that were basically holding the entire nation's potential back, right there at the docks.
So the biggest issue, the one that stood out the most, was a total lack of coordination. I mean, the decree itself says there was a recognized need to integrate and coordinate port planning. Without one single body calling the shots, all the planning was just piecemeal, and you can bet tons of opportunities were being missed.
And on top of that fragmentation, you had this really old-fashioned mindset. For decades, port administration was pretty much just seen as a way to collect money and handle some basic maintenance. There was no bigger picture, no strategy for using ports as, say, engines for national development. And this quote, this just nails the core issue perfectly. You can almost feel the frustration in these words from the decree. Ports weren't just being underused. Their massive potential to spark growth in regions far away from the capital was being completely, totally ignored.
So how do you fix a system that's so broken and fragmented? Well, the answer came on December 23, 1975, with Presidential Decree 857. And listen, this wasn't just a new set of rules. No, this was a radical reorganization. It created one single, powerful body to control every single port in the nation.
Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. This wasn't actually their first try. An earlier decree back in '74 created the first PPA. But it became clear really fast that it just didn't have enough power. So PDA 57 was basically a do-over, a revision designed to give the authority the teeth it really needed to get the job done right.
So who's the main character in our story here? Well, it's the Philippine Ports Authority, or PPA for short. The decree set it up as a corporate body. Think of it like a government-owned company, with a super clear singular mission: be the one and only national-level manager for all ports, period.
And to define its turf, its sphere of influence, the decree brought in this concept of a port district. Now, this is really crucial. It meant the PPA's control wasn't just over the docks themselves, but over the entire territorial jurisdiction. We're talking both land and sea, that was considered part of the whole port ecosystem.
Okay, so the PPA exists and its territory is all mapped out. But what was it actually supposed to do? Well, the decree lays out this really ambitious new vision, one that saw ports not just as places for ships to park, but as tools to literally reshape the entire national economy.
And this right here is the heart of it all, this 5-point mandate. It starts with coordination and efficiency, sure, but then it moves to a much grander vision. I mean, look at number 3, promote regional development. That's a direct shot at the old problem. And number 5 is so key. The PPA had to be financially self-sufficient, funding its own growth.
But, a grand plan is pretty much useless if you don't have the power to actually make it happen. So the decree gave the PPA a really powerful toolkit, filled with specific duties and powers to turn this vision into a reality. And the decree is super clear about this. It makes a very sharp distinction between what the PPA must do, its duties, and what it can do, its powers. You can think of it like a required to-do list versus a toolbox of capabilities it could pull out whenever it was needed.
So on that must-do list, you have the core functions. The PPA was obligated to create that national plan that everyone knew was missing. It had to regulate everything, from where a ship berths to how port workers were trained. This was all about establishing a baseline, a standard of control and competence across the entire system.
And in its toolbox, whoa, some serious capabilities. The PPA could buy and sell land, it could use eminent domain, which meant it could take private property for public port use. It could set its own fees and enter into basically any kind of contract. This wasn't just about administrative tweaks. This was the power to literally reshape the coastline and the financial landscape of every port in the country.
So you have this incredibly powerful new entity with this massive mandate, but who's actually running the show? And, where did all the money come from?
All right, first up, the money.
The PPA was set up with an authorized capital of 3 billion pesos. Now, to put that in perspective, in 1975, that was a colossal investment. It was a really clear signal from the government that this wasn't just another agency. This was a top national priority with some serious financial muscle behind it.
And as for who was in charge, the decree is crystal clear. The ultimate authority, all the corporate powers, they rested with a board of directors. This centralized all the decision-making right at the very top of the organization.
And just look at who was on that board. This was not some low-level committee. You've got the heads of Public Works, Finance, Trade, and the National Economic Planning Agency, NEDA. This structure made sure that port policy was plugged directly into the highest levels of national economic and infrastructure planning. And they even included a voice from the private sector, which is pretty interesting.
So when you boil it all down, Presidential Decree 857 was this incredibly bold, comprehensive blueprint designed for the challenges of its time. It unified a completely fragmented system and aimed to turn ports into real catalysts for national growth. Which, of course, leaves us with one final big question to think about. After nearly 50 years, is this foundational blueprint still the right fit for the incredibly complex demands of the 21st century?